All right, everybody, welcome to another Pandemic Punditry, Putting a Planet on a Pandemic Diet series here. We are thrilled, delighted to have Dr. Dalal AlGhawas, Program Director from Big Idea Ventures, and Managing Partner, Christian Cadeo from Big Idea Ventures as well. So we're going to talk today about, get their perspective, an investor's perspective on accelerators and incubators. And really find out, what the benefits are for those. And just to give some context to sort of why we're having this discussion, I don't know whether some of you are aware, but in this year, there have been 20 sort of alternative protein or meat companies that have been funded to a tune of $1.4 billion in the first 7 months of 2020, right? So there's an incredible amount of liquidity that's pouring into this space. And just as a point of comparison, the VC investments in this year for both dairy and meat is 1.1 billion. And that is equivalent, that is at least double, because last year it was only 457 million. So in a year-to-year comparison between 2019 and 2020, I mean, the year's not over and we're already sort of off to the races where this is concerned. So, that is why we thought it would be opportune for us to speak with people who are part of this whole ecosystem of funding companies, and most importantly, in case of Dr. Dalal, mentoring them and setting up a program so that your ideas can come to fruition easier, faster, quicker, and better. So I mean, that's the whole idea of an accelerator. So we'll talk to both of them about this, but maybe I can ask you, Dr. Dalal. So what inspired you to sort of get into food? I mean, you have a PhD in food technology and food science. What inspired you to get into this space? Because, I think before we started this in April, I don't think I've ever met a food scientist. Of course, now I've spoken to several, but it's not something that, people bump into on a regular basis. But there is so many of you involved in our food supply, but we don't sort of know that, right? I mean, we consume foods on a daily basis, and there are a lot of scientists behind that, but we don't really think of them. And I think this sort of this pandemic has really put everyone's focus on the food and what we put in our bodies. So if you can let us know a little bit about your story and how you sort of got into this field and what inspired you to get into food.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to be on your channel. I think, for us, probably like starting off your career in food science, you're always going to take a backseat and always backstage at like sort of developing, products, doing the research, and sort of it would be a very like narrow sort of circle that you would be moving around, more academic industry circles. And when I graduated and finished my PhD, and as I mentioned, I studied in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is, known to be sort of a financial hub, a very vibrant, city. And when I graduated, just amongst my network and peers, everyone kind of pushed me and advised me to just start doing sort of technical due diligence and sort of become a scientific advisor for investors. So I was lucky enough to be on the spot and given that chance to kind of experiment in this space. And once I got a taste of it, I just loved it. I thought it was really fascinating and really a great way to kind of bridge the gap from research to commercialization. So just kind of exploring those opportunities, seeing that investors are interested and like to hear what your opinions are on technology and get your feedback on very specific strategic insights. I did get the opportunity to kind of get more involved in the, let's say, commercialization space. And that's what kind of led me working for accelerators, working for VCs, making sure that, our inputs and our insights can be added and also help, entrepreneurs with their growth journey.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I know in the technology space that both Karthik and I are very familiar with it, which is IT and software. There are not many women people, programmers. It's somewhat of a male-dominated space. Is that true of your area as well, or are you seeing more women? And would you encourage women to who may be listening, who are thinking of a career choice, to maybe take on this as a part of this ongoing new food revolution? Because I'm sure we need more food scientists, I assume.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Of course, we always encourage women to get into every sector, including, science, technology, engineering, medicine, and of course, IT. Funny enough, so when I started off my career, I was in biomedical science. And there we had the opposite problem. There were a lot of women like studying this degree, and you can see that a lot in sort of the medical diagnostic space, as well as clinical or medical research. In food science, I would say it's more balanced. It is quite nice to see a better ratio. But of course, as usual, when you look at sort of upper management, there will always be a lot more, let's say, male representation compared to like, female leadership. So I think it's about really sticking in there for the long haul, kind of building up and making sure that we can reach, let's say, higher levels in the management space in food science and technology.
Fascinating. Karthika, you want to ask Christian some questions?
Yeah, actually, I do. Hi, Christian. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. Hey, so I think one of the biggest questions that our audience was having was, and I think we've titled it also, is accelerators versus incubators. If you're a startup, like, what is the difference between the two, and which program do you sort of join?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple distinction between the two. So if you are someone and you have an amazing idea, but that's all you have, in general, what you want to do is you want to go to an incubator, because they literally, as their name is called, they incubate ideas. Now, if you have something where it's more fleshed out, you basically have either a minimal viable product or a beta product. In tech, it's a software product. In food, like your first formulation, you maybe have 1 or 2 team members on your team. Then that's where you would go to an accelerator. And the point of the accelerator is, hey, we already have a minimal viable product. How can we go an accelerator and help you accelerate what you've already have? And that's really the clear distinction between the two. So they work both together, right? Hand to hand together.
Okay.
So they're very distinct offerings in some sense, right? I mean, you have an incubator which sort of incubates the idea. Your accelerator accelerates it further down. So it's a different phase in someone's sort of life cycle.
It is.
So Christian, are you inspired by some of the, because I know you have a tech background in terms of Microsoft and Google and all that. So are you inspired by some of the stuff that, Y Combinator and companies like that have done in the tech space? I mean, because I think is Big Idea Ventures also trying to sort of position itself somewhat like a Silicon Valley company or VC fund that sort of incubates and accelerates ideas and creates a lot of value for people that participate in the fund?
Well, so Lavender, let me tackle your first question. Is absolutely, I think what Y Combinator has done is unparalleled for the tech industry. In fact, one of our first investment was the first graduate from Y Combinator as a cell-based company, Shock Me, right? So that was our first investment. So we think what the team of Y Combinator done is amazing for the tech space. Okay. And to answer your second question is, no, we actually, I do want to make this, we are an accelerator. So we definitely are not an incubator. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but what we like to do, and that's why Dr. Dalal is on the team and so forth, is like we like great entrepreneurs coming on who have a minimum viable product and really need help acceleration from a operations perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a formulation, from a business, from a fundraising, and really help them scale, right? So that's really where our focus on. And the third point I'd like to make is we are not a Silicon Valley fund actually. So if the right answer is we are a global fund, and I think everyone says this, but when you look at our portfolio, we've invested in 26 different companies. From a geographic perspective, the breadth has been pretty astounding. I mean, we've invested in a company in India recently, invested in companies in Australia, 2 in China, 1 in Turkey, 1 in Philippines, 2 in Europe, obviously some in the US. So I think when you look at our portfolio, it's definitely not a Silicon Valley focus. In fact, our offices aren't even in Silicon Valley. We have a New York office in Singapore.
Yeah, so Christian, just in terms of Big Idea Ventures, do you see yourself, I mean, obviously you're an accelerator, but do you see yourself playing a larger role in this whole protein transition thing that's happening around the world?
So Karthika, actually, I respectfully want to say one thing is we look at ourselves as a venture capital fund, and we just happen to have an accelerator as a part of it, right? Which is quite an interesting model, right? So it's a hybrid model led on the VC model. So that's the first one. And then I think number 2, I'm so I was so astounded by your question. I couldn't remember what it was. What was the?
Do you have a larger vision of playing like a big role in the whole protein transition that is happening around the world now? Obviously, there's a massive push towards alt protein and all of that stuff because of the pandemic. So what role sort of do you see Big Idea Ventures playing in all of that?
Well, as really simply, this is our role is really to find and support amazing founders wherever they are in the world. You know, I mean, we're starting to see a lot of amazing deal flow coming from India, from Southeast Asia, from Hong Kong, from Asia, wherever it is. Our role is simply this: is finding amazing entrepreneurs. Individuals, he or she may have a great idea, whatever it is, and providing them capital, and number two, great team members like Dr. Dalal, we have Dr. Matthew, we have Abby in New York to help them accelerate. That is our role, really, right? Because we're not the one starting the company. We're not the one that has a hard job, frankly, right? It's these phenomenal entrepreneurs that are out there really starting these companies.
So, Dr. Dalal, I mean, so we have, let's assume that great entrepreneurs get chosen to come to an accelerator program at Big Idea Ventures. I know you have a food science background, and so as Dr. Matthew, as Christian mentioned. So what kind of sort of mentoring, what could they expect in this program? And just a qualifying question before that is, given that there's a lot of money now coming into the space, does it make sense? I mean, does it make sense? I mean, so now people who used to invest in tech and other things are suddenly seeing there's a, especially with beyond giving 417% returns, I think was the last time I checked on their main 2019 IPO. Everybody's sort of suddenly deciding, hey, maybe that's the space we should invest in, right? Way before you got into the space. There's a lot of money flowing in. So from a perspective of an entrepreneur who's sort of looking to take their product to market, what is the value that they would get from an accelerator as opposed to saying, hey, I'm just going to get some money from whoever is willing to throw it at me? What is the sort of the distinguishing feature? What is the value that you bring that maybe you want to let entrepreneurs know is useful in a program such as the one that you run?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really good question. So I think what entrepreneurs need to think about in the beginning is this smart money or dumb money, right? So like, do my investors really understand the space? Are they connected enough? Do they have the right sort of partners, collaborators? Are they in a location that's strategic for their distribution? Or even like scaling up production. So this is something that, accelerators will always pride themselves on, being sort of subject matter experts and making sure that we can really be that plug and play, let's say, Kickstarter, to really make sure that they can get their company traction like ahead. So in general, we usually say, like, for an accelerator program, you'll have a general outline of very basic topics, starting off from sort of company topics, hiring, strategy, and then you'll move on to sort of the product development. You'll have sessions on scaling, distribution, marketing segments, and then fundraising. So these are kind of the basic core elements, but we always tell companies, at least for our accelerator, that it's going to be a customized program. So we make sure that we are, identifying and covering topics that are specific for them. And then sort of the accelerator, let's say, team, or the Big Idea Venture team will then sort of become an ecosystem networker, make sure that we can get the right expertise on board to sort of contribute to the program, or we make sure that people within the team are going to provide content and guidance based on their specific needs. So I think, as Christian mentioned, in terms of the greater vision, I totally agree that we are an ecosystem builder. We are going to be contributing towards this space because we're constantly reaching out to academics, government players, industry partners, like everything, like from hospitality groups, every kind of distributor, every kind of, let's say, food producer. We even reach out to chefs, to sort of consumer types. So we do sort of consumer type sessions where we, for instance, last week we had someone from the vegan sort of plant-based fitness community really talking about their insights and what kind of products they're looking for. So, making sure that we can really have a customized program and be able to reach out to, let's say, everyone who's interested in this space to contribute their knowledge is super important. So I think, for going back to your question, for entrepreneurs, make sure that, you really understand what the value add is. It's not about just giving you cash and, that's it. It's really going to be a lifelong commitment. And, at the end of the day, that investor is always going to be tied to your portfolio because that's what you're going to showcase for follow-on funding. So be very careful. I know that it's, I would say in terms of quality of accelerators, there's no regulations or regulating body to assess the quality in many countries. Luckily in Singapore there is, and we are accredited by the Singaporean government. So it's very important, yeah, that, you know, as long as we do our homework and our due diligence on entrepreneurs, they should also do enough due diligence on their investors going forward.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question, Lavi.
Yes, me too.
Just you were mentioning about researching the quality of accelerators. So what sort of tips or ideas do you have, advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are doing this research? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think definitely speaking to, you know, companies that have gone through that accelerator is always a good sign, a good way to evaluate, you know, their experience, their hands-on experience with you know, people within the company, within the team, and also the quality of the program. So that can always be the first line of assessment. It could be, of course, talking to other investors, talking to industry players, also just following them on social media, trying to assess what kind of quality, what kind of people they bring onto the program. Of course, you can do as much research as you want, but you won't necessarily have all the pieces to make the final decision, but at least it will give you more guidance. As I said, some countries have regulating bodies for accelerators, which Singapore is one of them. I know in like the Middle East, our neighbor Bahrain, they've just implemented sort of a government body to regulate accelerators. And because of that, they actually shut down 90% of accelerator operations within the country, because a lot of them were not, you know, operating you know, correctly. So I think it just depends. You have to really read up, talk to, you know, understand, let's say, the ministry's roles in sort of regulating these, you know, these companies or these entities. And, you know, I think also seeing who's backing your accelerator is very important. So who are supporting, you know, either the VC fund or the accelerator firm is also super important.
So I have one question for Dr. Dalal and one for Christian. So Christian, so let me just follow up on Dr. Dalal. So you said you're doing a customized sort of program approach. So is it, do you set up sort of a, because I think it's sort of required, right? Because somebody could be doing plant-based, somebody could be cell-based, somebody could be doing fermentation, right? Somebody could be doing beverage or dairy, and somebody could be doing something else. So do you set up sort of like a mentor program to sort of, for each of the participants of your accelerator, so that they have some sort of, or a mentor or one person from BIV that sort of makes sure that they customize the program for them? How does that actual process of customization work?
Yeah, so typically the reason why we do sort of a customized program is more towards the stage of the company. So some of them, you know, might be already post-revenue. Some of them, you know, maybe they, especially cell-based companies, right? It's usually just a product which is in the lab, but it's really not going to sort of enter a production facility anytime soon. So making sure that we can assess different stages is always very important. I would say that there's never only one mentor, there's usually several, but typically what will happen is once we accept the company, we'll evaluate what are their, let's say main top priorities for their, you know, for their time with us throughout the accelerator program. So once we've identified that, we can then highlight and make sure that they either attend specific sessions or we connect them to specific mentors or advisors throughout their program. And of course, like, you know, for us, it's very important to also assess milestones throughout the program. So making sure that we set specific milestones for each company, which will vary, right? Because they all have different stages and are working on different things. So I think that's how we will, you know, try to make sure that we customize it and make sure the program is really applicable for the company.
So Christian, your current fund is $50 million, or is that there's a new, I was confused, the new protein fund a new fund, or is the old fund $50 million?
So we have one fund, which is a new protein fund one, and we're raising up to $50 million. US.
And your LPs on that are Temasek and Tyson Foods and Bula Group and some family offices, correct?
Right.
Okay. So you have actually people who are giants of the food industry sort of backing you. So that's sort of the connection. You know, you're looking at essentially, you know, based on your LPs, essentially what you're offering for your accelerators is that that expertise that comes from having those LPs in your fund, essentially, right? So because you're talking about taking this commercial, I mean, this is not something that you're doing in an artisanal way to serve 100 customers. We're talking thousands of people, right? So, or millions of people. So I guess that's why those industry partnerships matter.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I'd like to add to Kartika, your question is, if you are a founder, how do you evaluate Accelerator? Dr. Dalal had fantastic answers, which I wanted to add to that. Is a couple of things. One is look at the team's track record. Have they actually been in the industry, or do they have experience of actually knowing to produce a food product or the technical experiences, right? Especially in food, it's not like tech. I came from tech, Laughter, you came from tech. With tech, you're taking capital from a VC fund. They don't necessarily need to code, because coding is not easy, but at least someone could pick that up or have that skill set. Where in food, you're actually dealing with real life product where, frankly, if you don't get it right, a consumer could actually get sick, right? So when you're looking at accelerators for you to assess, look at the team composition. Do they have food scientists on staff that can literally help you with formulation, right? Because if they don't have that, capital is everywhere. Anyone can get capital. And can you get more than capital? Can you get capital plus expertise? So that's something I wanted to add. The other point I wanted to add was to Dr. Dalal's point is, and Lavender, you brought that up, is look at who their investors are and ask them. Give us some names. Give us some reference of investors that are backing you, and find out, is it a bunch of angel investors? Is it a pocket of capital that is good for me? Because if they're not willing to share you some of their investor names, then how are you sure that, hey, I go in the program? Which, by the way, when you join Accelerators, the reality is it can get expensive. I mean, there is a percentage of your equity that you have to give up, right? So you as an entrepreneur have to be prudent and ask them, hey, if I come into your accelerator, who are your investors? And once I graduate from the program, can I get tapped into them and get additional capital? How can they help me? And I think that's something where a lot of entrepreneurs don't ask accelerator. For us, just kind of throwing our little sales pitch, we're proud to say, look, our LPs, if you look at their investment track record, they invested in Beyond for the IPO, Memphis Meats early on, New Age Meats, Impossible Foods, Just, pretty much everyone they've invested in, obviously bigger ticket size, have invested. So when you join us, you're basically getting access to these potential LPs who can take and bridge you when you're at the point when you're going to be raising 5, 10, 15, $20 million, right? So that's quite important, in addition to what Dr. Dalal mentioned as well.
So how has the pandemic affected, A, the accelerator program, and B, sort of their go-to-market strategies? And Dr. Dalal, Christian, either of you can sort of answer that.
I'll take the first part, because you brought up a great point. One other assessment of an accelerator you got to ask as entrepreneur is, in good times, everyone invests, right? It's money's flowing, wine's flowing, champagne's flowing. Hey, we're throwing money around. But what you ask them is, in bad times, do they invest? And this is where you'll see who the winners and the losers. And I'll just point out to us is, in the midst of a pandemic, right, and where, frankly, we all thought the world was going to basically end, right, in March. I mean, it was pretty bad, right? March or May, we still globally made 13 investments. We did not pull, we went through a evaluation process. Companies applied to us. I think it was about 200, 250 companies applied to us. And we sent out offers for 13 companies. And here's the great thing that we're proud of. We did not pull one term sheet from anyone, even though the world was literally cratering for our eyes. You remember the stock market was down like 10% a day. It was crazy, right? And we stuck to our mission, which is, in good times and bad times, we will stick with our entrepreneurs. If we give out our term sheet and commit to them, we are going to go through with it. And frankly, there's a lot of funds that don't do that, and it's a bad signal on that. So you got to ask as an entrepreneur, ask them, in good times and bad times, do you continue to invest in what you believe in? So I'll leave the second question to Dr. Dalal, because she's working with companies a lot closer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, in terms of the, let's say the way they would need to pivot for this, crisis, I think this is something that a lot of our mentors are providing really great insights on. So this is something that's not only going to affect, entrepreneurs, it's affecting the whole F&B industry. And of course, it doesn't mean that the industry is going to collapse. It has to go on. So making sure that they understand how the industry is pivoting, what they need to do to sort of stay afloat. Something that we always tell our entrepreneurs, not to sort of be discouraged, because they're much further along than people who are just starting out in this space. So even though that it might be a bit, let's say, rocky going, forward, there's always a way for them to pick up. And there also are large opportunities, right? So making sure that they can sort of access digital marketing, making sure that they can, have better distribution of their products through e-commerce is always a way forward. So, we're trying to give them, all the right tools to sort of succeed in this climate. And so, yeah, I don't see any problems for them going forward.
So how does this,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Christian, I just had a follow-up question. So you said you're a hybrid model, right? Where you have an accelerator plus a VC fund. So do you do direct investments as well?
We do, yeah, and we're proud. One of our first investments was Shock Me, ran by two amazing CEOs, two scientists, Dr. Sandy and Dr. Kylie.
And what stage would that direct investment also be? Similar to all the others? It will be a seed round or pre-seed round?
It would not. No, it tends to be later stage. And,
Okay.
Shock Me, again, we're really proud. I mean, they went through the Y Combinator. Our fund wasn't set up. And, hopefully, I don't know, if they would have joined us before, but nevertheless, our fund wasn't set up yet. So, and they were something outside that ecosystem. It tends to be a little bit later stage.
Okay. And you still, I mean, in terms of a percentage, do you still do a lot of direct investments or mostly accelerator right now?
At this juncture, it's mostly accelerator, but it doesn't preclude us from making an investment directly into a company that just doesn't fit into that. Right? So we've been offered, as you can imagine, we've seen pretty much all the major deals that have been in the press, and whether or not we go forward with it, it's up to our investment committee.
Okay. Sorry, Kartika, go ahead.
No worries, Lavi. So it's just interesting when Dr. Dalal was talking about how there's always a way and that the food and beverage industry is pivoting. I was just trying to understand what the business continuity plans look like for like a food tech industry. What does that look like from an accelerator perspective?
Because of the pandemic, you mean?
Because of the pandemic, yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
so how has the pandemic impacted your business, right? Yeah.
Oh, the Big Idea Ventures or just?
Yeah, especially your accelerator program. Yeah.
Your accelerator program.
Yeah.
For us, it hasn't really changed much, to be honest. I mean, I can't, we're business as usual. I would say that it's gotten a lot more busy because there are so many, there's no limitations, right? You can connect with anyone from overseas now. Everyone is willing and open to do sort of virtual meetings. Our program is up and running, virtually. A lot of our companies are, global. So, just making sure that we have this virtual program has been fine. I think, everything now is doable. So, we're just making sure that, we can provide, let's say, experiences that were in person, trying to create, virtual experiences. This is one of the challenges that we're facing now, but we already have sort of found ways to kind of work around them. So just to give you an example, so we during the program, we run sort of showcases, so tasting showcases, quite regularly and frequently for our companies, to make sure that, they get sort of feedback from, industry, KOLs. So now that, everything is virtual, we're going to also do a virtual tasting session. So, it's just about finding ways around it. And I can tell you that a lot of people are still excited and interested. It hasn't really sort of reduced, the interest. So, yeah, I think for us it's business as usual, and everything is. Some things are easier online. So I think it's fine. For Big Idea Ventures. So
do you foresee that for your next cohort that comes up, that it would also be offline, virtual, or do you? I mean, I guess it all depends on the travel situation, right? Or would it be some kind of a hybrid model where some people will probably only need virtual, and till a tasting happens where you actually probably need to fly in with your samples, you pretty much do sort of a hybrid model. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you're sort of mulling because of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, based on I would say the success of a virtual program, we're most likely going to go with a hybrid model. And like you said, kind of just highlight very sort of key events like, the demo day, like, tasting sessions, other kinds of showcases, panels, conferences that we'll arrange. So, let's see, I think that might be also a bit more convenient for our companies, especially ones that have operations overseas.
Right.
And can't really sort of commit to a long program in Singapore. So yeah, I think it's really been a learning curve for us, and we can see a lot of opportunities going forward.
Yeah, but till you mentioned tasting, I just didn't realize. I mean, a lot of these cohorts. I mean, we are in the food business, right? So you have to actually taste something and also get to taste other people's stuff so that you sort of know whether you're on mark. And I just, yeah, lots of things can be done virtual, but that's one thing that taste division is still not a reality. So yeah, I see that point quite clearly. So there will have to be something there. So Christian, question for you. I mean, in terms of if somebody's contemplating applying for an accelerator program, or is, what are the sort of, from an equity standpoint or a cost standpoint, which I think you briefly mentioned, what are the advantages and disadvantages of an accelerator program in terms of the entrepreneur's equity?
Yeah, I want to be completely blunt on that. So let me tackle on the advantages. One is, it honestly, first and foremost, it depends on the accelerator you join, but since we're on this panel and I want to be a little bit self-serving, I'm going to talk about big idea ventures, right? So the first advantage when you join us is it's a team of experts, right? It's, you see, we have 3 PhD scientists on staff full time. We have 10 people in offices in Singapore, New York. We've deployed capital. We've done 26 investments in the last year globally, right? So first and foremost is advantage is you get access when you join BIV to a team of experts who look, we pay to work for you. I mean, we've had situations where, when Dr. Matthew, I'll give you an example, one of our portfolio companies needed some help with formulation. And Dr. Matthew literally spent 6 weeks in the laboratory working with their scientists, helping their formulation. And frankly, it was something part of the program. It's not like they had to pay for his consulting hours. It's literally take our investment money. And by the way, we also want to work for you as well, right? So it's almost like a group of McKinsey consultant that drops in, and wherever you need help, we'll help you out, right? So number one, that's kind of the advantage that we provide is 10 full-time people that effectively, and I apologize, I don't know why my camera keeps turning on and off.
That's okay. We got a bit of a disco effect going on. It's okay.
So number one is, we get a team of 10 full-time people that's going to help you really scale. Number two is, we're proud to say this, we got a really great network, right? Where depending on what you need, we'll be able to connect you to the right individuals. If you need investors, our Rolodex in terms of investors are quite broad. If you need to find people from the industry, we can help with that as well. Right? So, and I think that's something where an easy way to test if an accelerator has that is talk to one of their companies they invest in and ask them, hey, did they help me with any of the connections? So that's number 2 on that one, right? Mm-hmm. Number 3 is we're a global program. And this is the benefit of having an office in New York and Singapore. The reality is this sector right now is almost delineated where, frankly, most of the capital is in the US, right? A lot of the funds over there are a lot more mature. They're deploying a lot more capital. I mean, we saw Geltor that just raised $91 million. Perfect Day that raised, I think, $300 million. So a lot of the capital is there. It's obviously a lot more mature market. But in Asia, if you really want to get your products down to the COGS to a price that's actually feasible, you need to produce in Asia. That's the reality of it, right? But there's not as many investors. So the advantage we provide is you can access both offices. And in fact, our last cohort 1 had an opportunity to go in the demo day in New York right before the pandemic hit. And unfortunately, the Singapore one got delayed, but they're going to be able to do the Singapore. So they get access to both sides of capital.
That's very good. Okay.
Now let's talk about, I can always talk about all the benefits we have, but I want to be fair, what are the drawbacks? I think number 1 is, especially early on, we I wouldn't say we take a pound of flesh, but the reality is you're paying with some hard-earned equity here, which we think is going to be worth a lot. So you do have to kind of evaluate this of the benefits of joining the program. Is it worth it for me to give that percentage of my company up? Because it's valuable. These entrepreneurs are phenomenal. They're working hard day in, day out. Or is it worth it? So they have to make that assessment. Right? Number 2, I'd say the second one is, are you at that stage where an acceleration works? I mean, if you're already there generating a couple $1 million of top line revenue, you got a team of R&D and so forth, then you may not need to be in an accelerator, right? So I'd say those are probably the 2 biggest drawbacks.
So just in the same Y Combinator fashion, do you also follow a sort of a simple agreement for future equity model of sort of funding the companies initially, safe agreements? So do you do, or is it a sort of a fixed percentage right up front? I mean, because I think various accelerators, do different equity sort of arrangements.
Yeah.
I know that Y Combinator started this whole safe thing, which seemed to have caught on the tech side. Do you follow a similar thing on your side as well, or is it more standard, more traditional?
We do. We want to make it as simple as possible for the entrepreneurs. So it's basically 2 safe notes, and we take anywhere, it's roughly about 7%, plus or minus a couple basis points, 7% of the company.
Okay, 7% of the company, and roughly for something like how many, is it a fixed amount everybody gets, or it depends on the company that you're funding?
It is, yeah. I mean, we see so many deals, we do too many investments. It's a fixed amount.
Yeah, it's 125K if I'm not mistaken, according to the brochure. Yeah. Okay. All right. We've had a few audience questions coming in, Lavi. I'm not sure if you want to take it now.
Yeah, take it. Okay. Now it's good.
All right. There are a few questions Dr. Dalal has already jumped in and answered. Thank you so much.
It's nice to have a very techie person there who always answers questions.
Exactly.
I was once on this side and looking at Karthik, it's like, there's all these questions. He's like, don't worry, they've already answered it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So we've got a question coming in from Sambhavi Sahai. Thank you for joining us today. What forms of policy hurdles do you usually face? Are there certain policy issues that would dissuade you from taking on a business in the accelerator program or investing directly?
Okay, good question. I think in general, in terms of policies, for us as an alternative protein fund, we don't invest in, let's say, any sort of animal byproduct. So think of, honey coming from bees, sort of part of the Asian, let's say cuisine, bird's nest, which is, derived from bird's nests, as it states. We also wouldn't invest in that, or any company that's using those materials. When you look at, for instance, products that are maybe, plant-based or, protein alternatives that are for, animals. So it could be as animal feed or pet food. We also don't invest in that category either. And then when you look at the insects category, we don't invest in that either. So, I would just say it has to have, an innovative edge. In terms of policies per se, I would say that anything that's a bit controversial like CBD, this is something we won't touch. But other than that, I don't see any other issues. I don't know, Christian, have I missed anything? Something that we wouldn't invest in per se?
No, you covered it.
Okay, so Christian, I have a question for you. It's actually from one of the participants, but they want to be left anonymous. But thank you for your question. If the plant-based company is in one category of plant-based and it has already got invested once by a venture capitalist, do you still work on the accelerator model for other categories?
You mean like a new product, I assume?
Like a new product, yes.
Okay.
So they're saying if their top co has already got VC investment and they spin out a subsidiary, can that go to the accelerator? Is that the question?
Yes, that's the question.
That
yes.
could be one, yeah. Or let's say they did I don't know, cheese on the first one, and then now they're doing butter or something. And would the butter program go through an accelerator? Butter product, I guess, go through an accelerator as opposed to the cheese.
Well, we would invest at the top co. So if that's so actually the easy answer to that is, look, we've invested in companies where frankly they've raised capital before. Most of them are friends and family and angel syndicates, right? So I think if our 26 portfolio, I think there was only one that, interesting enough, I won't name names, and it's actually a company. They had a VC investor before, and they still felt like, hey, the value that we brought, they decided to still join the program, even though that they've already gotten VC investment, right? So, so to answer that question is, in the scenario where we would want to invest in the top co, we would not invest in we can, if it's a fully spin out potentially, but if it's just a subsidiary of a top co, we would need to invest in the top co company, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Probably the easy answer to that is simply look, if you've already gotten VC funding, it does not preclude you from applying to an accelerator, because you have to look at it in isolation, which is, again, can the team, meaning Dr. Dalal, myself, Andrew, who's the founder of the fund, can they help my business as it is right now? And if the answer is yes, then disregard the fact that it's an accelerator.
Right.
Right. We actually have another question coming up. also. I believe Dr. Dalal or Christian, you can answer this, is people want to know what is the specific requirements in terms of team members? What kind of people should the startup have in their team?
That's a really nice question. I would say that there's no specific, let's say, cookie cutter answer, but typically what we're looking for is we would prefer like not to accept a single founder, or let's say a company which only has one, let's say, core team member. And then another thing that we always want to see is a diversification. So making sure that you have someone that's going to be taking a more CO leadership role, or face front role, having someone who's sort of the technical expert, and then making sure someone else can be focused on marketing, sales, distribution. So as long the more team members the better, and ones that have very specific focuses as well.
Okay. Lavi, do you have a question? No.
No, I don't have a specific question.
I have
but I know you have one.
I have a specific one. Coming from Sri Lanka, and Lavi, you can probably relate to this, and Christian and Dr. Dalal. I'm just wondering, is there a plan within Big Idea Ventures for you to sort of reach the low-income country entrepreneurs, and how can they be a part of this?
Yeah, and I'll answer that. I think that's a fantastic question in the sense, on our side is we want to invest in an entrepreneur, whether he or she is from any country whatsoever, right? It doesn't matter if it's the lowest income country, it matters the highest income country, right? So for us, we're quite agnostic in that. But you are right, Kartika, is our outreach may be precluded in a lot of countries where maybe they don't have the right internet connection, or maybe they're just not getting the computer access. So how do we as a fund do some initiatives to reach out to these individuals? And frankly, the answer right now is we don't have a solution to that at this point. We've been fortunate where we've had, Dr. Dalal can come on this. We've had companies obviously apply in pretty much every Southeast Asian country. We had someone apply obviously from India, which is obviously not relevant. We've had some companies apply from, I think one from Sri Lanka, if I remember correctly. We had someone apply from Bhutan, who was actually a great company as well. We had one from Vietnam. So I think in general we are seeing a slow trickle of really amazing founders from lower income companies come in. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't work harder and try to outreach these other offices. So I think it's something where we need to do more outreach, working with your team, working with the podcast, working with great individuals in these countries and get the message out and say, look, we are here to invest in your idea. So that's right. So we do need to do some work on that. I'll be honest with you. Dr. Dalal, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to add on that point. So absolutely, I think the biggest issue that we see from this space. I mean, you can segment it in a lot of different ways. You can look at it from the gender roles in terms of more male entrepreneurs applying than female entrepreneurs, and then you can look at sort of the more high and lower income countries and the ones that have the right sort of infrastructure and support. So even amongst, let's say, higher income countries, if they don't have that sort of vibrant incubation ecosystem that is provided by the government, where you see in like a lot of other countries, such as or regions such as Europe or North America. So making sure that we can engage people who apply from these, let's say, regions that don't have the right infrastructure is very important. I know that the Big Idea Ventures team, we're very sort of communicative. And all of our, let's say, all of the applicants that have applied, especially ones from, let's say, lower income countries, we always make sure that we can provide enough guidance and feedback on how they can improve their application. And I personally always reach out to them if they need any sort of consultations, guidance, to help prepare them for the next, let's say, application, especially if they don't get through, through us. So, this is something that we have to do as a community to be very, conscious that people will have different, let's say, different accesses to opportunities, and making sure we can, be reachable, be available. I know Big Idea Ventures, we are very active in the Singaporean community in general, and we reach out to, all levels of the society, and even students. So even students that are, still at university, we want to make sure that they have all the right opportunities. So we provide, let's say, competitions, challenges. We also disseminate workshops, information, and we also provide mentorship, and like outside of our current roles. So making sure that you can give back to the community is super important, especially, you know, if you have that platform, like from, you know, either a large institution, and, you know, I think we all just have to do a lot more, you know, in both our professional and personal lives to make sure that we can make the world more accessible to lower income countries.
So I have a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. So Dr. Dalal brought up a great point, which I'm really proud she did, was so we get so many applications globally. I mean, it's just insane the amount of applications we're getting, right? And we expect that to continue. And for our last cohort too, we got a lot of applications, and kind of the thought process internally was like, do we respond to each one and give feedback? Because we literally, of the ones that we shortlist, they all go through a review cycle, a pretty intensive due diligence, right? And frankly, on my side, I was just like, we'll get so many, why don't we just send them a standard no for the ones I think accepted and then call it a day? But what I'm really happy that Dr. Lau pushed back, and you know, you were like, hey, no, we should give them like recommendation on how they did better because we have that information, right? And I think the team went ahead and did it and literally gave feedback, specific feedback to every applicant that we said no to. And I think that, again, is a way of us playing it forward, right? For these entrepreneurs who sometimes just get a blind email saying no, or they don't even hear a response, but for us to actively come back. And again, this is all Dr. Dalal's team. I didn't do anything. You know, I was a lazy one, right? I just wanted to send a template email. So I give a lot of credit to Dr. Dalal's team on that. And I think that's all accelerators should take that as something to do, especially for low-income communities as well.
That's a very interesting observation. It was funny when I used to work for Price Waterhouse in the U.S. We were told when we were interviewing candidates that, you know, make the interview such that even if they don't get a job at Price Waterhouse, so they go back and say, wow, that's a company that you really want to work for. And they'll tell other people about what a fabulous experience they had interviewing there, so that it actually creates brand value and attracts other candidates. So I think that's a very smart thing to do that you're doing, that you're responding back, because that builds a lot of good karma, as well as you know, gets your brand known as a place to be, or a place to get actually go to, as opposed to, well, they're just another accelerator. So that's really good. The question I had was sort of stepping back from the whole incubator accelerator conversation and numbers and everything else. If you were to sort of you know, put your hats on, what is the most exciting thing that's happening in this space that you're seeing? I mean, you know, we've been talking to entrepreneurs, some of whom are your portfolio companies, to people from all over the world, actually, who's been you know, trying to put the planet on a pandemic diet. And I'm just curious, what do you think are some of the most exciting things that you're seeing that's happening, that's out there? Maybe Dr. Dalal, you can go first, and then Christian, you can as well. I'm sure both of you have different views on it.
So, like, I mean, there's so many exciting things. It's from, you know, sort of the market adoption of, you know, let's say protein alternatives. I think, you know, seeing that this has become a really trendy, but not just, you know, sort of a fad, you know, but something that's going to be, you know, let's say lasting for quite some time. I think as well with the pandemic, you can really see that we fit very nicely in sort of these, you know, healthy and like wellness sort of, you know, food products. And, you know, as well as for consumers who are looking for sort of boosted immunity, right? So consuming higher amounts of fiber, you know, cutting down on saturated fats. This is something that we're always going to see that's going to work in our favor, as well as, you know, our companies are all mission driven. So, you know, I think this is something that really inspires us every day, that, you know, seeing that this is really changing, you know, in the, let's say, the cultural climate. You know, it's become acceptable to sort of, you know, advocate for, you know, healthier foods, more sustainable foods. And you can see this across many different sectors. And I think, you know, for us as investors, the most exciting thing, of course, is seeing those big deals. You know, the Oatly deal last week was incredible. You know, just seeing that come to fruition. And, you know, I think, you know, just seeing all these different, you know, technological advancements. I think also last week, Higher Stakes from the UK, sort of a female, you know, entrepreneur company, sort of produced the first cultured bacon. So you know, I think every couple of weeks, we always see these great announcements, and it's really great to see that we're you know, pandemic proof, right? And hopefully recession proof, if that does, you know, come forward. So, you know, this is, I would say for me, this is really one of the highlights of this industry.
Christian, for you?
You know, I hope this doesn't sound just being politically correct, and it's not. I mean, it is something where I'm really excited for. It's simply this: is Lavender and Kartika, I think you were in tech, you might have been tech, but Lavender, you and I came in tech, and we know how tech is, it's kind of how it is, especially in the US, right? There tends to be one ethnicity and one gender for the most part, right? But in food, what we're seeing is, and this is what makes me exciting, is, let me just give you statistics, right? Of our fund, we have 10 full-time people in Singapore, New York. 60% of the people who work on our team are people of color. 60% of the people in our team are women. In fact, let me give you another statistic. That's the fund, and I think because Andrew, who's the founder of our fund, built this team based on that composition, it also translates to our investment. And I'll give you a statistic there as well. Our first 2 global investments we did globally, not in Singapore, not in New York, but literally globally, were both women-led companies. One was Shock Me, obviously ran by Dr. Sandy, Dr. Kai, and number 2 was a company called Cultivated Food, ran by Betty Liu here in Singapore. And we didn't invest in it because we had some gender allocation we needed. We invested because they're an amazing entrepreneur, great idea. They just happen to be women, right? On our first cohort one in New York, 2 of our companies were co-founded by African Americans, right? 2 African American ladies, right? So I think it's something where, just the diversity and the kind of the multi-ethnic kind of diversity and the breadth that we're seeing in this sector is so exciting to me. Like, we are meeting some of the most phenomenal founders from all these different markets, and frankly, it's not not a bunch of guys who are either white or Asian, right? It's a diversity of different people. That's what excites me.
Great. I mean, that's a fabulous answer. I was not expecting that one, but it's very pertinent for the times. And I'm glad to hear that. I think, wish we had that in tech. I really do.
Yeah, we wish we had that in tech for sure. But speaking of tech, I do have sort of a follow-up question. I know the tech sort of went through like a dot-com boom and a bubble. Do you sort of expect food, tech, all protein to go through the same thing?
Dr. you want to take a stab and then I'll have my thoughts.
Sorry, I didn't get the question exactly. Maybe you could repeat.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, back in 2000s, we saw tech go through sort of a dot-com boom and a bubble, right? Do you sort of anticipate food technology and all protein to go through the same sort of bubble, or?
Okay.
So you're asking whether this is all hype,
like
eventually this will sort of burst.
Exactly. Will it burst?
I don't think so. I mean, for several reasons. I think we're especially for alternative proteins, right? So like we're trying to move away from animal husbandry, and we all know sort of the issues with that. We all know for instance the spread of zoonotic viruses, which we're currently facing today, is always going to be one of the strongest issues why we should stop these practices, or not just stop them, but minimize them, and sort of rely on other sources of protein. So I don't think it's really going to burst per se, just because this is something that's working towards sustainability. I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to see very volatile price points for animal meat, especially red meat. So I think this is just sort of feeding into what's going to be happening in the market. So unless we come up with some very different let's say source of food, like a Soylent Soylent Green, one fits all, that's super sustainable. But no, I think as human beings we want to have diversity. So yeah, I think it's gonna be fine for us.
Okay.
Good. Christine, you want to take a stab at that, or you're done? That was answered.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page with Dr. Dalal, and the simple reason is a couple of things. Is one, the dot-com boom, all the stuff that was created, no one needed to eat that crap, right? I mean, that's simply that. Where with us, at the end of the day, people need to eat. And if people need to eat, and if you could bring a product that tastes great, nutritionally it's better, and I know for a fact it's going to get less expensive with plant-based sector, then how can it not sell? And I think that's look, you will see companies that will go boom and bust. I mean, I was at one of them. I was at Just, right, where we were, frankly, back when I joined in 2014, we were the #1 company in the space. I mean, we had unlimited capital, all the press in the world. And then, 6 years later in 2020, clearly no one's going to doubt this. We were eclipsed by 2 companies who were no one really talked about them back 2014, beyond impossible, right? So you will have that where different companies will go good and go bad, but I think on a macro basis, no, not at all. I think we are literally at the precipice of a food revolution that's going to happen. Simply, if the plant-based sector or the cell-based sector tastes exactly like the equivalent animal protein, and we can get it cheaper and it's healthier in some ways, who's not going to buy that? I mean, it's just logical, right?
And all the market indices right now suggest that, this is no longer a fad. This is here to stay, especially, when you look at meat consumption during the pandemic, the adoption of plant-based foods. I mean, all those metrics are in the right direction, right? So it's highly unlikely that, I mean, it's a great question, by the way, Karthika, but, highly unlikely this bubble, and Christian's point is well taken. There was, we're doing something very substantial for survival, which is food. And so, yes.
I would argue respectfully, it was never a fad. It was simply where, yes, it was, I would say it was purely because of the price point. It was only able to be accessible to a certain demographic. Right. And that's why it was more limited in nature and so forth. But I think as that price point goes down, then it's going to get more widespread. So I don't think it was ever a fad. And
I agree with you. I never thought it was a fad when I became vegan, 3 years ago. So yeah. If I could turn vegan, I always tell people anybody can. So,
so we have one final interesting
some questions, and then we should wrap up, right? We're right at the end here.
One final audience question: if an applicant is not chosen for the first time that they apply, can they reapply again for another cohort?
Yes, please. Because companies change, people change, right? You get better, you improve and stuff like that. So you are not, because you applied once, you're not precluded from applying again. In fact, you can apply as many times you want. We may say no every single time, but we hope you apply every single time.
Good. Thank you. Good. So that's it from my end, Lavi.
Sorry?
Those are all of the questions.
Yeah, okay.
From my end.
And I think there were some questions on how to get in touch with Christian and Dr. AlGhawas is required. I think we can easily put there, if you don't mind, we can share your their email address. So how do they just contact the website? How do they want you to, how do you want people to contact you in case they have questions or are curious about applying?
I would say through LinkedIn is fine. They
LinkedIn
can.
fine.
I think I already got one response from one request on LinkedIn who said that they were listening to this podcast. So yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, great.
We can also, if you want to put out, please, one of our info at Big Idea Ventures, and that will go to the whole team as well.
Okay.
Info at Big Idea Ventures. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you have a registration open for a new cohort coming up, right? I mean, can you mention what the deadline is?
Before we go that, I just want to throw in self-serving is for all your listeners there, we want to play it forward. So even if you are just thinking of an idea within time, reason, and stuff like that, we're definitely here to help and throw out advice. I mean, that's the only way we're going to grow this industry, right? So I think that's number one. Number two is if you don't follow us on LinkedIn, please follow us because that's where all the relevant information about deadlines, programs, and stuff like that. But I'll leave it to Dr. Dalal to talk about the specifics.
So if somebody's interested in sort of approaching you, should they already have a pitch deck ready with their financials and everything in there, or can they be sort of napkin? I mean, what amount of formality is required is what I'm trying to ask on behalf of the audience.
Yeah, so I would say, there's, I would to encourage all companies to apply before September 4th. That's when our applications close. So the Accelerator program will start in January 2021. And typically, we're going to be asking, I guess, a couple of questions about the company. They'll be able to upload, specific documents like their pitch deck. I think going forward, once they've kind of been screened and moved over to the first round, then we will, sort of ask them for further documents so that could, help us to conduct our due diligence. So to start off with, we only require a pitch deck and I think a video as well if they want. It's not mandatory, but yeah, in general, I think it's just a step-by-step process. And yeah, if they feel there's anything else they can share, they can also submit it with their application.
Great. Okay.
Fantastic.
I think we're right on time. Okay. So Thank you both of you for joining us, and also for allowing some of your portfolio companies to be featured on our programs. They've been a fascinating cohort. I thought that we should definitely talk to the two of you at the end of all of that, because we've had the pleasure and the honor of speaking to some very, very interesting companies in the smart protein space. They've been exciting guests to have. We've all learned something from them. We thank you for making that available for us, and also to letting us know that there is a new cohort coming up. September 4th is the deadline. So go online and fill out the forms. As I heard from Christian and also you, Dr. Dalal, is that anybody from anywhere in the world can apply, and are encouraged to apply. So I hope that people do that, the people listening in and people who will listen to the recording. So thank you very much for both of you for taking the time from your respective places in Kuwait and Singapore to join us today. So have a great rest of the week, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Dr. Dalal.
Thank you, Kartika. Thank you, Lavin.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.